Case 1. Julissa Thaler and the murder of Eli Hart. It began as a seemingly routine traffic stop on the quiet morning of May 20th, 2022, in Orono, Minnesota. A white sedan pulled to the shoulder, its driver, 28-year-old Julissa Thaler, looking disheveled and distant. Officers had noticed erratic driving, but what they discovered when they approached would unravel into one of the darkest tragedies in recent Minnesota history. From the trunk came a faint, hollow thud. When the latch was lifted, the horror was undeniable. Inside, still strapped into his booster seat, lay 6-year-old Eli Hart, riddled with shotgun wounds. A child who should have been laughing on the school bus or playing with toys was now lifeless in the back of his mother's car. To understand the depth of this crime, we need to know who Eli was. To those who loved him, Eli was sunshine in human form. A curious, bright little boy, he loved superheroes, school buses, and the world of make-believe. His teachers described him as eager to learn and full of joy. His father, Torrey Hart, fought tirelessly for custody, warning courts and social workers that Julissa was unstable and unfit. Yet, despite red flags, drug use, erratic behavior, and multiple interventions from child protection, the system returned Eli to his mother's care in the spring of 2022. Just weeks later, he would be dead. The day before his death seemed deceptively ordinary. Julissa checked Eli out of school. By evening, neighbors would later recall hearing loud bangs, but they dismissed it as fireworks. What those sounds truly were, investigators later discovered, was Julissa firing round after round into her own son inside her vehicle. She had purchased the shotgun only days earlier, and prosecutors would later prove she fired 6 shots, reloaded, and fired 3 more. This was not an accident nor a moment of panic. It was a deliberate, brutal execution. The investigation unfolded quickly. Detectives scoured Julissa's digital trail, uncovering chilling internet searches. How to load a shotgun in a car, and most haunting of all, how to stop a child from being adopted by father. The car itself told a gruesome story: bloodstains, spent shell casings, and evidence of attempted cleanup. It was as if every corner of her world betrayed her intent. Julissa was arrested the same day. During interrogation, she was cold, evasive, and detached. No tears, no remorse. Detectives pressed her, but she deflected, a blank wall where a grieving mother should have been. Prosecutors wasted no time. She was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. In February 2023, the trial began in Hennepin County. For 4 days, jurors heard harrowing testimony. They listened as prosecutors laid out the timeline with surgical precision: the shotgun purchase, the deliberate firing of 9 rounds, the attempt to conceal Eli's body. They heard from Eli's father, Torrey, who spoke of the son he had tried so desperately to protect, and the warnings he had begged authorities to heed. The defense pointed to Julissa's mental health, but the evidence was overwhelming. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. On February 16, 2023, Judge J. Quam pronounced the sentence: life in prison without parole. In the courtroom, Eli's family wept. Torrey's words echoed, "My son deserved a chance to grow up." She stole that Julissa, in stark contrast, lashed out with a profane denial, further deepening the chasm between a grieving family and a mother who had already destroyed herself. Today, Julissa Thaler sits behind the walls of the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee, serving her life sentence with no possibility of release. Eli's desk at school was adorned with flowers, drawings, and messages from classmates who couldn't understand why their friend was suddenly gone. For them, Eli was more than a victim of a crime. He was their playmate, their classmate, their joy. The aftermath left Minnesota reeling. Questions thundered through the state. How did the system fail so completely? Why were repeated warnings ignored? Investigative reports revealed a cascade of missed opportunities, leading to lawsuits and, eventually, a $2.25 million settlement acknowledging the failures of Dakota County's child protection decisions. Eli's murder became more than a single case. It became a symbol of systemic collapse, a stark reminder that reunification at any cost can sometimes cost the most innocent lives. In the end, the story of Julissa Thaler is not about her. It is about Eli Hart, a 6-year-old boy whose laughter once filled classrooms and whose dreams were cut short in the back of his mother's car. His story forces us to confront the fragility of the systems meant to protect children and the unimaginable truth that sometimes the greatest danger is the person meant to love them most. Case 2. Larena Renee Jackson, the Cass Lake toddler murder. It was the evening of August 19th, 2023, when a frantic call came from rural Cass Lake on the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. A young mother claimed her toddler son had been run over by a car. To the casual ear, it sounded like a tragic accident. But the moment first responders arrived, they knew something was terribly wrong. The victim was just 23 months old. He was a toddler, still learning to string words together, clinging to favorite toys, and exploring the world with the wobbly excitement of early childhood. His name was withheld in many early reports, but what was clear is that he was deeply loved by relatives who often helped care for him. His life was just beginning, full of milestones yet to come. When deputies entered the home, the scene clashed with Larena's story. Bloodstains marked the walls and bedding. Most disturbingly, investigators found indentations in the sheetrock above the headboard of the bed, dents that lined up exactly with the shape of a toddler's head. The story of a car accident collapsed instantly. This was not the result of tires on pavement. It was the result of repeated blunt force trauma inside the home. Larena told officers her son had been hit by a vehicle driven by his father, but investigators quickly determined that version was impossible. Tire tracks, medical reports, and the physical evidence all contradicted her account. To police, it was clear she had not only harmed her son, but tried to disguise it behind a false narrative. The boy clung to life for days, but his injuries were too severe. On August 24th, 2023, he was pronounced dead. By that time, Larena herself had vanished. For 3 days, she was on the run, until police located her on August 22nd, hiding in a friend's house. When arrested, she showed little acknowledgement of the suffering she had caused. The investigation revealed a horrifying picture. Prosecutors alleged Larena had slammed her toddler's head against the wall with such force that the sheetrock itself bore the marks. Detectives described the evidence as undeniable. The walls told the story she tried to erase. Court proceedings began months later. At first, Larena denied everything. She insisted she had panicked, that her son's death was an accident, but as investigators laid out the case, the forensic blood analysis, the wall indentations, the lies about a car accident, the truth became unavoidable. On February 10, 2025, in Cass County District Court, Larena pleaded guilty to second-degree murder without intent while committing a felony assault. Her plea was a moment of resignation, an acknowledgement of the violence she had inflicted. On March 25, 2025, the judge sentenced her to 210 months in prison, 17 and a half years, with credit for 581 days already served in custody. For the family, the sentence carried weight, but no comfort. They left the courtroom knowing that a child's life, not yet 2 years old, had been stolen, and no prison term could return him. The aftermath devastated Cass Lake. Community members gathered for vigils, leaving teddy bears, flowers, and candles outside the small home where the child once lived. Tribal elders spoke of healing, urging families to protect the most vulnerable and to break cycles of violence before they turned fatal. Relatives who spoke at the funeral described the little boy as playful, bright, and loved. A child who adored laughter and who should have grown up surrounded by family, not remembered in grief. His death left not only a void in his family, but a scar across the entire reservation. In the end, the name Larena Renee Jackson will forever be tied to betrayal, a mother who destroyed the very life she was meant to protect. And her son, just shy of 2 years old, will be remembered not for the tragedy of his death, but for the joy he brought in his short life. His memory now stands as a haunting reminder of why communities must act, intervene, and protect children when danger signs appear. Case 3. Esperanza Rae Harding, the hotel bathtub murder. On the morning of February 6, 2024, hotel staff at the Extended Stay America in Bloomington, Minnesota, noticed something unusual. A young woman checked out early, dragging behind her a garbage bag that dripped faintly on the lobby floor. Within hours, the truth would come crashing down in one of the most horrific crimes the city had ever seen. Inside that bag was the body of her infant son, a child only a few months old, discarded like trash. The woman's name was Esperanza Rae Harding. To those who had known her casually, Esperanza was a 20-something mother struggling to stay afloat. She had lived a transient life, moving between shelters and hotels. Those closest to her recalled someone who appeared overwhelmed, often isolated, but no one could have predicted the cruelty that was about to unfold. Her infant son, named Mateo Harding, was small, vulnerable, and completely dependent on her. In the weeks leading up to February, Esperanza appeared increasingly agitated. At one point, she texted her boyfriend in alarming tones, suggesting she could no longer handle caring for the child. The day of the crime was meticulously reconstructed during the investigation. In her hotel room, Esperanza placed her infant in the bathtub, turned on the water, and walked away. As the baby cried, gasping and flailing, she left him alone. By the time she returned, the baby had drowned. Instead of calling 911, she did something even more chilling. She wrapped his tiny body in a plastic bag, stuffed it inside the hotel's trash receptacle, and texted her boyfriend a photograph of her child's remains. A detail prosecutors later described as one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. Discovery of the crime came swiftly. A sanitation worker found the bag, horrified by what he saw inside. Police were called, and the grim chain of evidence led them back to the Extended Stay America. Surveillance footage showed Esperanza leaving her hotel room with the bag and heading to the dumpster. When detectives confronted her, she initially claimed the child had died of natural causes. But there were no hospital records, no calls for help, only a body, cold and discarded, bearing the unmistakable signs of drowning. The investigation uncovered further disturbing details. Court records showed Esperanza had been searching for ways to explain an infant's sudden death. Text messages revealed erratic behavior, including messages to her boyfriend that read like confessions wrapped in excuses. Detectives recovered the knife she had earlier claimed to wield against herself in despair. Though evidence showed no attempt at self-harm, only her son's tragic end. Esperanza was arrested in Bloomington and charged with second-degree murder. During her 2025 sentencing hearing in Hennepin County District Court, prosecutors painted a picture of deliberate cruelty. They emphasized that this was not a panicked accident, but a conscious choice to silence her child forever. The defense attempted to argue mental health struggles and poor decision-making in the throes of crisis, but the jury and judge alike were unmoved. On March 2025, before Judge William Koch, Esperanza Rae Harding was sentenced to 32 years in prison, the maximum allowed under her plea agreement. Some outlets reported the sentencing hearing occurred on March 6th, while others listed March 28th. Though the exact day varied in public reporting, what is certain and undisputed is the outcome: a prison term that will keep her confined for decades, with no chance of early release until she has served the majority of it. The aftermath left Bloomington stunned. Residents struggled to understand how a young mother could not only take her baby's life, but dispose of him in such a degrading way. Community vigils were held for the child with flowers and stuffed animals, placed near the hotel where his short life ended. Advocacy groups called for greater resources for struggling mothers, but also for stronger systems of accountability when warning signs appear. In the end, this case is remembered less for Esperanza's excuses and more for the silent tragedy of a baby who never had a chance to live. His cries echoed only briefly in a hotel bathroom before being drowned out forever, leaving behind a story that forces us to confront the darkest corners of neglect, despair, and evil hidden in plain sight. Case 4, Jennifer Marie Stately, the Red Lake Murders and Arson. It was a bitterly cold night in March 2024 on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota when smoke began rising from a home on Little Rock Road. Neighbors who saw the blaze assumed it was a tragic accident, but what firefighters found inside told a story far more chilling. 2 young boys, ages 5 and 6, were discovered dead. Their bodies bore stab wounds, and the fire was no accident. Their mother, Jennifer Marie Stately, stood accused of both murder and arson. To understand the horror, we need to step back. Jennifer Stately was a 35-year-old mother of 3, living in the Red Lake Nation community. To outsiders, she was a woman facing hardship and responsibility. But those close to her described volatility, instability in her relationships, emotional struggles and difficulties managing her children. Among her 3 sons, the 2 oldest, bright, playful boys, had recently begun attending school in the community. Their father had been absent, leaving Jennifer as their primary caregiver. Behind closed doors, however, life in that small house was unraveling. On the day of the crime, evidence later revealed that Jennifer stabbed her 2 oldest sons in their bedrooms, inflicting fatal wounds. As the children lay dying, she set fire to the home, turning the crime scene into an inferno of smoke and flames. With the house engulfed, Jennifer fled, not alone, but with her surviving youngest child, a 3-year-old boy. Authorities later reported that the toddler showed clear signs of neglect, malnourishment, and inadequate care. The juxtaposition was horrifying. 2 children brutally murdered, and a 3rd snatched into an uncertain fate by the very person sworn to protect him. The crime was discovered in stages. Fire crews battled the blaze through the night, eventually pulling the bodies of the older children from the charred home. When investigators examined the scene, it was immediately clear this was not an accidental fire. Gasoline traces confirmed arson. Court documents revealed one of the children died from a stab wound. The other suffered from multiple stab wounds, but ultimately died from smoke inhalation. The Red Lake Tribal Police, with the assistance of the FBI, began piecing together what had happened. Detectives quickly closed in on Jennifer. She was located hours later with her surviving toddler, showing no visible remorse or panic. During interviews, she offered conflicting explanations, claiming she had lost control, then shifting to blame others, then lapsing into silence. The interrogation transcripts later presented in court showed a woman detached, unwilling to fully admit to the enormity of what she had done. In May 2024, a federal grand jury indicted Jennifer Marie Stately on charges of second-degree murder, arson, and child neglect. Because the crimes occurred on tribal land, the U.S. District Court for Minnesota handled the case. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate nature of the murders, the use of a knife, the choice to set a fire afterward, and the decision to flee with her youngest son instead of seeking help. Court documents also revealed a history of concerns raised by relatives about her ability to care for the children, concerns that now seemed tragically prophetic. The trial proceedings began in late 2024. Prosecutors laid out the sequence of events in haunting detail, while the defense pointed to Jennifer's fragile mental state and personal struggles. But the brutality of the crime overshadowed every argument. Testimonies from extended family members painted a portrait of two little boys full of life, one who loved basketball, the other who was fascinated by animals, both of whom had their futures stolen. Update on court status, late 2025. While earlier reporting suggested a plea deal might be in motion, federal court records confirm that Stately initially entered a not guilty plea, and her defense filed an insanity notice. As of late 2025, there is no publicly available record of a final guilty plea or sentencing. What is certain is that she remains federally indicted on multiple counts of murder, arson, and child neglect, charges that carry the possibility of life in prison if convicted. The aftermath in Red Lake was devastating. Vigils were held at the local community center where tribal elders spoke of healing and resilience. Small crosses were placed near the remains of the burned home, surrounded by flowers and stuffed animals left by neighbors who struggled to comprehend such loss. The Red Lake Tribal Council issued a statement. These children were part of our future. Their lives mattered. For the surviving youngest son, protective custody and foster placement were arranged. Advocates say his path to healing will be long. For the community, the crime remains a deep wound. In the end, the name Jennifer Stately will forever be linked not to her struggles, but to the unspeakable choice she made in March 2024, to turn her home into a tomb and erase the lives of her own children. Case 5. Jorden. Nicole Borders, the mother who drained her son's blood. It was a story that stunned even seasoned investigators in Crow Wing County, Minnesota. In August 2025, 33-year-old Jorden, sometimes spelled Jordan, Nicole Borders was sentenced for a crime so bizarre and cruel that prosecutors called it one of the most disturbing cases of child torture ever seen in this state. The cold open begins in a small hospital in Brainerd, where doctors struggled to make sense of a little boy who appeared deathly ill. His blood counts were dangerously low, his body weak, and yet his symptoms didn't match any known disease. For months, he had been in and out of hospitals, subjected to invasive treatments, procedures, and constant medical intervention. His mother, Jorden Borders, always by his side, appeared frantic, worried, and persuasive. But as the medical community soon discovered, she wasn't there to protect him. She was the one making him sick. Behind the curtain of sympathy, Jorden was orchestrating a cruel scheme. Investigators later revealed that she had been secretly draining her son's blood to induce false symptoms, then rushing him to doctors to demand treatment. At times, she falsified medical records and pushed for unnecessary surgeries. This was more than neglect. It was Munchausen syndrome by proxy taken to extremes, where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a child to draw attention and sympathy, sometimes even financial benefit. The background is chilling. Jorden's life appeared outwardly ordinary, a mother of multiple children in central Minnesota, but she harbored a deep need for control and attention. Friends and relatives recalled how she often exaggerated illnesses, either her own or her children's. Some doctors had grown suspicious, but it wasn't until her son nearly died that the pattern became undeniable. The discovery of the crime came through hospital staff. After yet another emergency admission, doctors noticed inconsistencies in his blood work and symptoms. A quiet investigation began behind the scenes. Surveillance, careful medical monitoring, and eventually direct questioning revealed the shocking truth. Jorden herself was causing the boy's illness. She was deliberately taking his blood and manipulating his health for her own purposes. The investigation expanded. Detectives uncovered evidence that she had subjected her children to years of abuse, coercing them into medical treatments they didn't need, inventing symptoms and at times physically harming them to make her lies believable. The scope widened to include fraud charges, as she allegedly used her children's fabricated medical conditions to collect aid and financial support. In 2025, the case went to trial in Crow Wing County. Prosecutors called it torture. They presented medical records, testimony from doctors, and evidence of repeated manipulation. The defense argued mental illness, citing compulsions beyond her control, but the jury was unmoved. Jurors later told reporters that the evidence of deliberate harm was overwhelming. In August 2025, Jorden Borders was sentenced to 468 months in prison, 39 years. For the children she abused, it was a partial measure of justice. For the community, it was a wake-up call. Judge Patricia Allender-Anys, presiding over sentencing, said, "What you did was beyond comprehension. You stole your son's health, his safety, and nearly his life, all for your own twisted needs." Today, Jorden sits in state prison, her children placed in protective care. Doctors who testified against her continue to highlight the case as an example of why hospitals must stay vigilant for signs of medical child abuse. The aftermath reverberated across Minnesota. Advocacy groups pushed for stronger training to identify Munchausen by proxy, noting how many doctors and social workers missed red flags for years. For many, this case wasn't just about Jorden's crimes. It was about the system's blind spots, the failure to connect the dots sooner. The true victims, her children, now face a lifetime of physical and emotional healing. Her son, once drained of blood for her lies, survived. But the scars, both literal and emotional, remain. In the end, Jorden Borders' name has become synonymous with betrayal of the deepest kind. A mother weaponizing her children's trust, turning their love into suffering, and using their pain as currency for attention. Case 6. Valerie Connie Zamora. The Moorhead Toddler Murder. It was the afternoon of May 15th, 2025, when a desperate 911 call sent paramedics racing to a modest apartment complex in Moorhead, Minnesota. Inside one of the units, first responders found a sight that shook even the most seasoned among them. A little boy, just 20 months old, lying unresponsive on the floor. His tiny body was limp, his skin bruised, his stomach swollen. His name was Jose Lazarus Zamora. Nearby stood his mother, 32-year-old Valerie Connie Zamora, insisting to anyone who would listen that her baby had simply been sick, lethargic, vomiting, not himself. She said she had given him Tylenol and Gatorade, that she had done everything she could, but the child's body told a very different story. Officers on the scene saw what paramedics already knew. Jose was covered in bruises. His arms, torso, even his head bore dark purple marks. The pattern and placement of the injuries made it clear these were not the result of a fall, and they were not the marks of a sick child. They were the signs of violence. An autopsy by the medical examiner confirmed the horrifying truth. Jose had died from blunt force trauma, internal bleeding, fresh bruises layered over older ones, suggesting not one isolated incident but repeated assaults over time. Doctors concluded with certainty this was homicide. Born in September 2023, Jose had just begun to toddle confidently on his little legs. He loved music and would dance clumsily in the living room when relatives played his favorite songs. Family members described him as bright, playful, and endlessly curious. He giggled at peekaboo games and had a smile that could soften any heart. He was supposed to have a lifetime ahead of him. First days of preschool, birthday cakes, scraped knees, hugs from his grandparents. Instead, his short life was cut violently short by the one person meant to protect him. In the hours after his death, Valerie stuck to her story. She told investigators Jose had been ill, that she thought it was just a stomach bug, but when detectives showed her the medical examiner's findings, her story began to crumble. First, she claimed he had fallen. Then she insisted she only tried to comfort him, that the bruises must have come from rough play. Investigators pressed harder with autopsy photos, witness statements, and evidence from inside the home. Neighbors had already reported hearing yelling at odd hours, sometimes a child's cries that went on far too long. Some had even seen Valerie lose her temper in public before. Detectives later testified that during questioning, Valerie never displayed the kind of raw grief one might expect from a mother whose child had just died. Instead, she deflected, shifted her story, and grew defensive, as though the truth was an inconvenience, not a tragedy. Days later, Valerie was formally arrested and charged in Clay County with second-degree murder without intent. Prosecutors described Jose's death as the result of sustained abuse, not an accident. They emphasized his helplessness, a toddler who could not escape, could not run, could not call for help. In court hearings through the summer of 2025, prosecutors presented a grim picture of neglect and violence. They showed jurors photos of Jose's bruised body, autopsy reports documenting internal injuries, and testimony from neighbors who had heard the chaos inside that apartment. The defense, by contrast, hinted at exhaustion, stress, and poor judgment, but the sheer brutality of the injuries left little room for sympathy. Valerie's bail was denied. Prosecutors argued she posed a danger and had already attempted to mislead investigators. As of late 2025, she remains in custody, awaiting trial. The tragedy shook Moorhead. Residents of the apartment complex gathered for candlelight vigils, leaving stuffed animals and handwritten notes at the steps where Jose once toddled into the yard. His obituary described him as a bright light taken far too soon. Friends and relatives promised to keep his memory alive. Community members began asking hard questions. Could this have been prevented? Were there missed signs that should have triggered intervention? The case reignited debate about Minnesota's child welfare system and whether neighbors, social workers, or police had opportunities to step in before Jose's life was stolen. At his funeral, Jose's tiny casket was carried by loved ones whose hearts were shattered. They buried not only a child, but a future. The birthdays he would never celebrate, the milestones he would never reach. And now, the name Valerie Connie Zamora stands alongside Minnesota's darkest cases. Another mother who crossed the unthinkable line, turning violence against her own child. Her fate will soon be decided in court, but one truth is already undeniable. A toddler's laughter was silenced forever, and the bruises on his body remain as a haunting testimony to the danger of ignoring warning signs, a reminder that when we fail to act, it is the smallest and most vulnerable who pay the ultimate price. Case 7. Edwina Marie Stoutenburgh, The Demons Told Me, Attempted Murder. On a summer morning in July 2025, the quiet town of Thief River Falls, Minnesota, was rocked by a 911 call that officers described as bone-chilling. A frantic voice on the line, "My son's been hurt. There's blood everywhere." Deputies rushed to a modest home just outside town. When they arrived, they found a young boy holding his neck, blood soaking his shirt. His mother, 34-year-old Edwina Marie Stoutenburgh, stood nearby, glassy-eyed and eerily calm. As paramedics worked quickly, deputies pressed her to explain what happened. Her words stunned them. "The demons told me to do it." She admitted without hesitation that she had taken a knife to her son's throat because voices commanded her to kill both of her children. The victim was just 10 years old, a boy who loved video games, fishing trips with his grandpa, and drawing superheroes in his school notebooks. That morning, his life nearly ended in the place he should have felt safest. He had gone to bed the night before in peace, only to wake to his mother standing over him with a blade. His younger sibling was also in the house, a potential second victim, saved only because Edwina was interrupted. The discovery was terrifying. Blood stained the bedding, the carpet, and the boy's pajamas. Deputies quickly found the knife on a nearby counter. The boy's injuries were described as serious but non-life-threatening by the sheriff's office. Doctors would later confirm that he was lucky to survive the slash wounds. Still, the intent was deadly. She had tried to silence her child permanently. The investigation revealed a troubling history. Relatives said Edwina had long struggled with mental health issues, but resisted treatment. Court filings noted she experienced hallucinations and delusions, speaking of demons that she believed controlled her actions. Detectives pieced together her night. Edwina waited until the early hours, retrieved a kitchen knife, and attacked her older son in bed. The boy woke in pain, screamed, and ran for help, an act that saved his life. Police immediately arrested Stoutenburgh. During her first interview, she repeated her bizarre justification, insisting she was tormented by demons and that they wanted the children gone. Prosecutors filed charges of attempted second-degree murder and second-degree assault with a dangerous weapon. In Pennington County District Court, the case drew intense media attention. Prosecutors framed the act as both brutal and deliberate. A mother planning to kill her own children while they slept, the defense leaned on her history of untreated psychosis, arguing she was incapable of rational judgment. The boy survived after surgery, though he now carries scars across his neck and deeper ones in his childhood memories. In court hearings, relatives were divided. Some pleaded for leniency given her mental illness, while others demanded the maximum sentence, unable to forgive her attempt to take a child's life. As of late 2025, Stoutenburgh remains in custody, held without bail. Court-appointed evaluators are assessing her mental health competency, a process that will determine whether she faces trial or long-term commitment in a secure psychiatric facility. The legal outcome is still pending, but the trauma has already left permanent marks on her family and her community. The aftermath has shaken Thief River Falls. Neighbors struggle to reconcile the quiet woman they knew with the attacker described in court documents. Advocates highlight the gaps in rural Minnesota's mental health system, where care is often delayed or inaccessible until tragedy strikes. For the boy who survived, life will never be the same. His summer of bike rides and baseball games turned into hospital rooms and nightmares, and for his younger sibling, the shadow of what nearly happened lingers with every whispered bedtime prayer. Edwina's name now stands as a chilling reminder of what can happen when untreated illness collides with parental responsibility. She claimed demons told her to do it, but in the end, it was her own hand that carved the wound. Case 8. Rachel Lynn Modrow, the Hopkins Asthma Neglect Case. It was the morning of February 10th, 2024, when 9-year-old Amy Lynn Modrow began struggling to breathe inside her family's home in Hopkins, Minnesota. Amy had lived with asthma for years. She knew the feeling of her chest tightening, the fear of each breath getting shorter. This time, she pleaded with her parents for help. She asked for her inhaler. She begged to be taken to the hospital. But instead of calling 911, her mother, Rachel Lynn Modrow, decided to rely on home remedies. She ran a hot shower and told Amy to breathe in the steam. Hours passed. Amy's breathing worsened. The inhaler she needed had reportedly been empty for weeks. Her father, Anthony Modrow, was also home that morning. Despite his daughter's gasps for air, neither parent called for professional help. By mid-morning, Amy was collapsing. At 10:40 a.m., a family friend, horrified at what she saw, finally called 911. When paramedics arrived, Amy was in critical condition. She was rushed to the hospital, placed on life support, and declared brain dead on February 17th, 2024. Doctors were blunt. Amy could have survived if she had received proper medical care sooner. This was not an unavoidable tragedy. It was preventable. The investigation revealed the full neglect. Prosecutors said Rachel had chosen to treat Amy with steam baths, herbal teas, and other remedies rather than seek emergency care. Court filings noted the parents delayed action for more than 3 hours after knowing Amy was in crisis. Police records captured the devastating conclusion. Amy did not die because her asthma was unstoppable, but because her parents did nothing. Rachel Lynn Modrow, then 35, was arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter. In court, prosecutors argued she had ignored the most basic duty of a parent to protect her child. They pointed to her conscious choice to let hours tick by while Amy's condition worsened. Rachel later pleaded guilty. On January 7, 2025, in Hennepin County District Court, she was sentenced to 41 months in prison, just under 3.5 years. Her husband, Anthony Modrow, was also charged. He too pleaded guilty, admitting his role in failing to save Amy's life. In June 2025, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The courtroom heard emotional statements from family and community members. Some begged the judge to consider that the Modrows were overwhelmed and misguided rather than malicious. But prosecutors reminded the court that Amy herself had begged for help, her voice ignored until it was too late. The aftermath tore through the Hopkins community. Teachers described Amy as a bright, kind child who loved reading and drawing and who had dreams of becoming a nurse to help people like me who can't breathe. At her funeral, pink and purple balloons, her favorite colors, were released into the sky. Friends and classmates cried as they remembered a little girl who should have been preparing for 4th grade, not buried before her 10th birthday. In the end, this case became about more than just one mother's fatal choices. It was about 2 parents who turned away as their child begged them to act. It was about the devastating cost of neglect and the reminder that even the most treatable of conditions can become deadly when help is withheld. Amy Lynn Modrow's name now stands as a painful lesson in Minnesota's courts. A child's life ended not by illness alone, but by the silence and inaction of the people who should have loved her most. Case 9, Wynona Ann Littlewolf. The fentanyl death of baby Ashton. On the morning of March 12, 2022, staff at the Doubletree Hotel in Roseville, Minnesota, dialed 911 after finding an infant boy unresponsive in one of the rooms. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. The child, just 8 months old, was pronounced dead. His name was Ashton Michael Littlewolf. What police discovered in that room would reveal a tragedy born not of illness, but of addiction. On the floor beside the baby's body lay a burned piece of tin foil and a rolled-up dollar bill. Both tested positive for fentanyl, the synthetic opioid that has claimed thousands of lives across Minnesota. Officers quickly realized what had happened. Ashton had ingested fentanyl residue while crawling on the hotel room floor. His mother, 29-year-old Wynona Ann Littlewolf, admitted she had been using fentanyl in the room. Toxicology tests confirmed that her blood also contained the drug. She told investigators she knew Ashton was crawling on the floor where she had smoked, yet she never picked up the paraphernalia. Hours later, her baby was dead. The investigation revealed just how preventable the tragedy was. Fentanyl, even in microscopic amounts, can kill an adult. For a baby, a speck is fatal. Prosecutors emphasized that Wynona not only failed to protect her child, but created the very environment that caused his death. In April 2024, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office charged Wynona with 2 counts of second-degree manslaughter. At the time, she was already incarcerated on an unrelated conviction. The charges marked the start of a long, painful legal process. Court filings painted a picture of a young mother trapped in addiction. Relatives testified she loved Ashton but could not escape the grip of fentanyl. The defense leaned heavily on this, portraying Wynona as a victim of the opioid epidemic, but prosecutors pushed back. Addiction did not excuse the reckless exposure of a crawling infant to lethal drugs. In April 2025, Wynona entered a guilty plea to one count of manslaughter. The second was dismissed under the agreement. Then, in June 2025, Judge Kelly Olmsted of Ramsey County District Court imposed her sentence: 105 months in prison, nearly 9 years, but stayed during probation. This meant Wynona would not serve prison time immediately. Instead, she was placed under strict probation terms, with a looming consequence of nearly a decade behind bars if she violated them. The sentence outraged some in the community. How could a child's death result in probation? Prosecutors argued that while the stayed sentence may appear lenient, it kept Wynona under supervision and left her facing years in prison should she relapse. For advocates battling the fentanyl crisis, the case underscored how the opioid epidemic devastates not just users, but entire families. Ashton's short life was honored in an obituary that described him as a smiling baby boy, loved by his extended family, remembered for his giggles and bright eyes. His death left a hole in the community, another innocent life taken by the silent spread of fentanyl. The aftermath continues to ripple. In Roseville, the case sparked calls for hotels to do more in spotting drug activity. In Minnesota courts, it reignited debates over whether addiction should mitigate punishment when the victim is a child. For Ashton's relatives, the questions will never stop. What if Wynona had asked for help sooner? What if someone had stepped in before fentanyl reached that hotel room floor? In the end, the name Wynona Ann Littlewolf is tied forever to the epidemic's darkest toll, a baby gone before his first birthday, and the name Ashton Michael Littlewolf now stands as a reminder of what is at stake when society fails to confront addiction's deadly reach. Case 10, Heather and Darcy Cross, the death of Cecelia. This is the story of Cecelia Cross, a 10-year-old girl from Pine River, Minnesota. A child with complex needs, a child who could not speak for herself, a child who relied on her parents for everything, and a child who was failed at every turn. Cecelia was autistic and nonverbal. She had severe feeding issues and required constant supervision. Her life was complicated, but her smile, her love of rhythm and music, and her gentle presence were cherished by those who worked with her. To keep her safe, her parents confined her each night to a medical safety bed, a heavy enclosed structure designed to protect children like her from wandering or self-harm. But in Cecelia's case, that bed became a cage, and then it became a coffin. On August the 25th, 2025, Cecelia's parents, Heather and Darcy Cross, later told investigators they gave her a bottle and medication between 4 and 6 a.m., and then they went back to sleep. For the next 10 to 12 hours, Cecelia was left completely alone in her bedroom. Her room was filthy. Officers later described it as soiled with urine and feces, the mattress stained and bare. Cecelia, a child who needed stimulation, interaction, and care, was shut away in silence. At around 4:30 p.m., nearly half a day later, her father finally opened the door. What he found was unspeakable. The safety bed had failed catastrophically. The inner frame, which the parents knew was broken days earlier, had come apart. A metal pole shifted and collapsed, pinning Cecelia's small body by her head and neck. She suffocated beneath its weight, alone, for hours. When first responders arrived, Heather was attempting CPR, but it was immediately clear to the officer on scene that rigor mortis had already set in. Cecelia had been dead for hours. She had died quietly, unseen, without a hand to hold or a comforting voice nearby. The very device meant to protect her had become the instrument of her death. The horror deepened when investigators examined the evidence. Text messages revealed Heather had known for days that the bed was broken and unsafe. Replacement parts had been ordered, but professional repairs were never made. The parents claimed they checked on their daughters every couple of hours, But the physical evidence, rigor mortis, the room state, and the timeline contradicted them. Investigators also discovered Cecelia's 12-year-old sister, also autistic, was kept confined in her own bed for long stretches, provided only with an iPad and a bedpan. Social services removed her immediately. This wasn't just a single accident. Prosecutors argued it was a pattern of neglect, long-standing, cruel, and preventable. Both parents were arrested on September 17, 2025. They now face charges of second-degree manslaughter and child endangerment in Crow Wing County District Court. Their bail was set at $400,000 each, or $100,000 with conditions. In the words of prosecutors, Cecelia's death was entirely preventable. It was not sudden violence. It was not rage. It was neglect, stretched out over hours, over days, over years. The Pine River community reeled. Vigils were held. Neighbors placed flowers and teddy bears outside the family home. Disability advocates called it a rallying cry that children with profound needs cannot be left to parents alone, without oversight, without accountability, without compassion. Cecelia's obituary spoke of her love of music, her gentle spirit, and the joy she brought to those who saw past her struggles. Her name is now whispered as both a heartbreak and a warning. Her death was not loud, but silent, not in public, but behind a closed door. And in that silence, she was betrayed by the very people who were supposed to keep her safe. The name Cecelia Cross is now etched into Minnesota's darkest stories, not because of malice, but because of the quiet cruelty of neglect. Her short life ended crushed beneath the weight of indifference. But her memory demands that we do better, that no child with special needs be left unseen, that no parent's neglect go unchecked. Her story is not only a tragedy, it is a call to action, because silence kills, and in Cecelia's silence, we all hear the warning. Case 11, Suad Mohamed Ali, the Pelican Rapids murder. It was the night of July 10, 2023, when emergency responders were called to a home in Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. Inside, they found a 3-year-old girl lying on the living room floor, unresponsive. Her father, Ibrahim Ali, was kneeling over her, screaming to anyone who would listen, "She killed her! She killed her!" As medics rushed in to perform CPR, observers noticed something chilling. The child's mother, Suad Mohamed Ali, stood nearby, not distraught, not frantic, but smiling. The little girl was only 3 years old, just beginning to discover the world. Family members said she loved to dance, to play with her older cousins, and to run barefoot through the grass. She had a sweet, curious spirit, the kind that brightened every room she entered. That night, she cried out for comfort, hungry and restless. But instead of receiving care, her cries became the trigger for violence. In her own words, Suad admitted she had placed her hand over her daughter's mouth and nose, suffocating her to stop the crying. Initial charging documents also recorded another disturbing admission. Earlier that evening, she had tried to stab the child with a knife, though the attempt failed. When investigators searched the home, they found a knife left on the arm of the couch, exactly where she said it would be. Paramedics worked frantically, but it was too late. The little girl vomited during resuscitation attempts, and by the time she reached Essentia Health St. Mary's in Detroit Lakes, she was pronounced dead. The investigation quickly confirmed the worst. The child had died from suffocation, and Suad herself confessed. Detectives described her demeanor as flat, detached, and at times oddly content. Witnesses, including her partner, recalled her smiling as medics tried to save the child. That haunting detail became one of the most chilling aspects of the case. But as the case progressed, a new layer emerged: Suad's mental health. Court records in late 2023 showed she was found incompetent to stand trial and sent for treatment. Doctors described her as suffering from extreme mental illness, with delusions and distorted perceptions of reality. She spent months in restoration programs before she was declared fit to face justice. By 2025, after competency was restored, Suad entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder. Local reporting indicated she received a prison sentence of around 12 and a half years. Under Minnesota law, offenders typically serve 2/3 of their sentence in prison, and the remainder under supervised release, meaning she will likely spend at least 6 years behind bars before any release. While the precise details of her sentencing have not yet been fully updated in public records, what is clear is that she remains incarcerated today. The aftermath devastated Pelican Rapids. A community known for its closeness and diversity was left shaken by the violent death of a child within its midst. At vigils, residents spoke not only of the little girl they lost, but of the need for stronger mental health interventions and better safety nets for families in crisis. In the end, this case isn't defined by Suad Ali's plea or even by her erratic behavior that night. It is defined by a 3-year-old girl who will never celebrate another birthday, whose voice was silenced before she ever had the chance to grow. Her death remains a haunting reminder that when mental illness goes untreated and cries for help go unanswered, the most vulnerable among us can pay the ultimate price. Case 12. Jennifer Nichole Baechle, the baby angel cold case. On a September morning in 2011, 2 fishermen were casting their lines along the Mississippi River near Wynona, Minnesota, when something strange caught their attention. A plastic tote floated near the bank, half submerged in the water. Curious, they pulled it in. What they found inside left them trembling: the body of a newborn baby girl, wrapped in plastic bags, surrounded by incense sticks and angel figurines. She was placed in a green t-shirt, as if someone had tried to stage her as both hidden and memorialized. The baby was so young, only a day or 2 old, that investigators could not even give her a proper name. Instead, they called her Baby Angel. Her death shook Wynona. Autopsies revealed she had severe skull fractures, injuries so violent that investigators knew immediately this was not abandonment or desperation, it was homicide. Yet there were no immediate leads. The baby had been discarded without a birth certificate, without a hospital record, without anyone coming forward. For years, her case file remained open but stagnant, and every September, locals would return to her grave to lay flowers, refusing to let her be forgotten. Baby Angel became part of the town's collective grief, a symbol of innocence stolen. But questions lingered: who was her mother? Why had she killed her? And how had she managed to live for more than a decade without being held accountable? For 14 long years, the case went cold. Detectives followed dead ends, tested DNA against state databases, and re-interviewed locals, but no match was ever made. That changed in April 2025, when advances in forensic genealogy breathed new life into the investigation. Using DNA recovered from the tote and Baby Angel's body, investigators traced the genetic markers to a woman still living in the Wynona area, Jennifer Nichole Baechle, 43 years old. Detectives discreetly collected discarded hygiene items belonging to Baechle, a toothbrush, a piece of clothing, and the DNA matched. At last, the identity of Baby Angel's mother was confirmed. When confronted, Jennifer denied involvement at first, but the forensic evidence was overwhelming. She was arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree manslaughter. The news hit Wynona like an earthquake. For years, residents had imagined Baby Angel's mother as a shadow, perhaps long gone. Instead, she had been living among them, carrying the secret of what she had done. In court filings, prosecutors laid out the chilling narrative. Jennifer had concealed her pregnancy, given birth in secret, and within hours fatally injured her baby. Rather than seek help or surrender the child, she placed her in the tote with symbolic trinkets and left her to drift in the river. The community's grief reignited. At Baby Angel's grave, which had been lovingly tended for more than a decade, mourners gathered again, this time with both sorrow and rage. For them, the arrest was bittersweet. They finally knew the truth, but the truth was unbearable. The very person meant to nurture baby Angel was the one who killed her. As of late 2025, Baechle remains in custody, her trial pending. The charges carry a maximum of years in prison, but many in Wynona believe no sentence could equal the loss of a life never allowed to begin. Advocates for children and newborn safety have called the case a painful reminder of the need for awareness around safe haven laws, which allow parents to legally and anonymously surrender newborns at hospitals and fire stations without penalty. Baby Angel could have been saved, but her mother chose silence and violence instead. For 14 years, the Mississippi River carried the memory of an unnamed child. Now, with Jennifer Baechle's arrest, justice has finally begun to catch up. Baby Angel's short life is no longer just a mystery. She is a victim whose story has been reclaimed, whose memory endures not because of her mother's cruelty, but because a community refused to forget her. In the end, this case is not about Jennifer Baechle. It is about a newborn girl who never had the chance to grow, a baby placed in a river with angels, now remembered by a town that calls her their own. As we close this series on Minnesota's most disturbing cases of maternal betrayal, one truth rises above them all. Every child deserves safety, love, and the chance to grow. The stories you've heard are not just about crimes, they are about lives stolen, warning signs ignored, and systems that must do better. These children were the most vulnerable among us, and their voices were silenced. It is up to us to make sure they are never forgotten. To those of you who are already subscribed, sharing these stories, and keeping the conversation alive, thank you. Your support helps shine a light on injustice, spread awareness, and remind the world why protecting children must always come first. If you're new here, we invite you to join this growing community. Subscribe, share these stories, and help us carry this mission forward. The more we raise our voices, the fewer children fall through the cracks. Together, we can honor the memory of these young lives by fighting for change, demanding accountability, and building a safer future. Because at the end of every true crime story, what matters most is not the evil we expose, but the lives we protect moving forward.